Hi guys, so let's start with the basics of neuroanatomy in this video. So the basics, the very basic ones are the brain. This is the whole brain. It consists of cerebrum. This is the cerebrum, which will be divided into two cerebral hemispheres. Cerebellum, which is one on either side, and brainstem. So brainstem is again divided into pons and medulla. All right, and here right above the brainstem we have the midbrain. I mean, this goes a larger way, but this is the midbrain. Okay, so the lobes, we have four lobes. The frontal lobe is the anterior most one. Parietal lobe is right behind the frontal lobe. Temporal lobe is what is on the lateral sides, and occipital lobe, which is on the behind. All right. So the arteries that supply to the brain are the three main arteries called anterior cerebral artery (ACA), MCA middle cerebral artery, and posterior cerebral artery or PCA. So posterior, as the name says, it supplies to the posterior part of the brain. So especially the occipital lobe. All right, and the middle cerebral artery supplies to the lateral surface of the brain. For example, here you can see all the temporal lobe and a little bit of parietal lobe and the frontal lobe. The lateral parts are supplied by the middle cerebral artery. So you can see here as well, this is the temporal lobe, and even here this is the temporal. Some place here is temporal and some parietal and some frontal. Okay, and anterior cerebral artery, as the name says, it supplies to the anterior part of the brain. So that is all of this. Okay, the anterior and the medial part. Okay, so this is very important, circle of Willis. So this takes a lot of practice. I mean, I've practiced it so many times and now I can draw it without seeing. So that's how you have to do, because this is very important to know later on about the strokes. So strokes is also a very important part of neuroanatomy, right? So to know better, like to know strokes very well, you'll have to know the circle of Willis very well. So as you can see here, from the arch of aorta here, from this arch of aorta, two arteries are coming up. So one is the subclavian artery, which gives the vertebral artery, which branches off into the vertebral artery, which goes posteriorly to the brain. So it supplies to the posterior part of the brain. Okay, and this one here is the internal carotid. This is the common carotid artery, which branches off into internal carotid artery, which supplies to the anterior part of the brain. Okay, so this is the anterior part of the brain. So ICA supplies to the anterior part, internal carotid artery, and VA, vertebral artery, supplies to the posterior part of the brain. Okay. So let's talk about the anterior part first. So as you can see here, this internal carotid artery goes here and supplies, branches off into anterior cerebral artery here and middle cerebral artery here. So let's draw it in a different slide to be clear, to get more clarity about this. So let's say this is the internal carotid artery here. So this is going anteriorly to give the anterior cerebral artery, right? And it is also going to the middle side to give the middle cerebral artery. So the same thing is going to happen on the other side as well, right? So this is the internal carotid artery. So it goes anteriorly to give ACA and medially to give MCA, right? So these two anterior cerebral arteries, they communicate with each other with the artery called anterior communicating artery. So these are communicating with each other, right? Therefore, anterior communicating artery. And these middle cerebral arteries here, they communicate with the posterior cerebral artery, which arises from the vertebral artery, because that is the posterior side. So these here communicate using the posterior communicating arteries. Okay, so this is the PCA, these are the PCAs, and these here are the posterior communicating artery. So anterior communicating artery we have one, and we have two posterior communicating arteries. Alright, because anterior communicating artery is the communication between the two anterior cerebral arteries, whereas posterior communicating arteries are the communication between MCA and PCA on either side, on both the sides. Alright. So now let's talk about the posterior side of the brain. So just imagine this is the cerebrum, right? And right under the cerebrum, we have two cerebelli, right? Like this. And from the middle of those, we have pons and medulla oblongata. And from here, this extends into the spinal cord, right? So vertebral artery, like we have seen earlier, it comes from the side, like this. So the vertebral artery, these come like this from the sides. From both the sides, vertebral arteries are coming up like this. And these vertebral arteries go into the pons and they become one. Okay, they merge together and become something called the basilar artery. Okay, and this basilar artery now supplies to the cerebrum. So here we have seen that the cerebrum is here, and this is the posterior side, right? Therefore, these two will be the posterior communicating artery, posterior cerebral arteries on both the sides. Okay, and we have also seen that these two are the cerebelli, correct? So this is the anterior cerebellum, and this is the superior cerebellum, and this is the inferior cerebellum, right? So this will be superior cerebellar artery, and here we'll have two called anterior inferior cerebellar artery, ICA, and posterior inferior cerebellar artery called PICA. Okay, and the basilar artery, because this is the pons, right, as you can see here, so it will give out some pontine arteries as well. Okay, and then these vertebral arteries here, they give out into the spine, because we have a spine here. So this artery comes off into the spine with the name anterior spinal artery. Okay, so let's revise once more. Anterior, so anterior is given by ICA, right? This goes anteriorly and medially. So anterior is ACA, and this side also we have the same. Anterior is ACA, and the medial one is MCA. All right, so these two communicate here with the anterior communicating arteries, and MCA communicate with the posterior cerebral arteries, right? So this will be the posterior cerebral artery here, and they communicate with posterior communicating artery. This is one posterior communicating, and this is the other side. All right, so this is the anterior side. So now the posterior side. So this here is the cerebrum. These are the belli. Okay, here we have the pons, medulla, and the spinal cord. So from the spinal cord arises. So here come our vertebral arteries, which go here and merge into one called basilar artery. This is the vertebral artery. They merge into the basilar artery, which goes into the cerebrum as PCA on both the sides. And this gives to the cerebellum. This will be superior cerebellar artery on both the sides, superior cerebellar artery. And this will be anterior ICA. And this will be PICA, posterior inferior cerebellar artery. Again, ICA and PICA. And we have also seen that the vertebral artery branches off downwards into the spinal cord as anterior spinal artery. So this is all about the circle of Willis. Alright, so you have to get perfect in this. Just keep practicing. Alright, thank you.